I feel like I haven't done a movie review in a while, so I'm gonna do something a little different. Instead of just doing one review, I'm going to do an entire series review, and that series is probably one of my favorite action film franchises of all time, but it's also one of my favorite buddy cop franchises of all time as well. And also, the first movie is unironically because despite popular belief, I don't hate Christmas. I'm just indifferent to it. But the first movie in this franchise is unironically my favorite Christmas movie. And no, it's not Die Hard. It's Lethal Weapon. But to also kind of settle this preemptively, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? That depends on you. I personally don't consider it because I think for the sake of story and narrative and everything, like for something to be considered a Christmas movie, the actual like themes of really, if for anything to be considered a holiday movie, the central themes of that holiday have to actually have a presence, not just atmospheric, but in terms of tone and story beat, but also beyond things, also like soundtrack, like the actual theme. Like in case in point, Lethal Weapon is more of a Christmas movie than Die Hard because the actual underlying themes of Christmas are actually present in Lethal Weapon, whereas Christmas is just an atmospheric backdrop for for Die Hard. Like case in point, themes of Christmas of like togetherness and giving and all that is actually present in Lethal Weapon. It's not in Die Hard. If you think Die Hard's a Christmas movie, that's your choice. More power to you. I don't. But that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. Starting with Lethal Weapon from 1987. Apart from being my favorite Christmas movie, Lethal Weapon just kind of goes hard, but it goes hard in like all the right ways. You have a brilliant cast. Like I said, at it like when you think of Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, you almost it when you realize how much chemistry those two have, it's marvelous. Like some people go to when it gets to like buddy cop films, some people reference things like Rush Hour, which don't get me wrong, Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan have phenomenal chemistry with each other. Some people also like to reference Tango and Cash, which don't get me wrong, I love that movie, and I'm a fan of both Kurt Russell and Sylvester Stallone. But I feel like when it gets to buddy cop films, nobody had better chemistry between them than Gibson and Glover. Like you just can't beat it. Like the way they play off of each other. Uh, like they actually have like the way they start off, like they don't like each other, and then as the film progresses, they actually start to like get attached to. They almost develop this kind of brotherly bond, and even to the point that the character of Martin Riggs actually does effectively become a part of Murtaugh's family. Like his kids love him, his wife loves him, like, and it's great. But it's also how they like lift each other up while also occasionally roasting the shit out of each other as well. And this is the first film, so this is the one, obviously, the plot of this one is about a conspiracy of a drug related suicide, and it ends up enveloping into a post Vietnam mercenary drug cartel. And all the while, like, again, you have it's also an introduction to the franchise as well, like establishing the character of Martin Riggs, establishing the character of Roger Murtaugh, and kind of everything that comes with them. I also like the unrated version of the film as well, because I think the unrated version is just, it's so much better, because I know depending on which version of the film you watch, like Murtaugh gets introduced, I believe, relatively the same, where he shaved off his beard. It's allegedly supposed to be like he's in the last few days before retirement, and he's kind of like reeling in because you can tell deep down he kind of doesn't want to do it, but at the same time he kind of everyone wants him to. But this film also, if I remember correctly, it has almost two completely, depending on if you're watching the theatrical version or the unrated version, it has completely like two different introductions for Martin Riggs. Like there's the bit with the hostage situation at the elementary school, and then there's the one where it's the drug bust at the Christmas tree lot, which actually is, I think, my favorite introduction to his character. Like, yeah, the elementary school hostage situation just kind of shows you how badass like Riggs is, but while also showing other elements of his personality as well, like the self-destructive part of him, which I'll get into later. But I feel like the Christmas tree lot bust kind of shows more of his personality and gives you kind of like of his behavior and everything like that. Long and short, the first Lethal Weapon, I give that's a solid 10 out of 10 for me. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. Then I guess we'll move on to Lethal Weapon 2. Lethal Weapon 2 kind of takes more of a hotbed topic as well, because it addresses like these socio-political scenarios of like what was going on in South Africa at the time, because the main villains are Nazi white South Africans, effectively, who I think it was racketeering or whatever was the whole motive. I never really thought much about what the bad guys in Lethal Weapon 2 were doing. But this is also the same film that introduces Joe Pesci as Leo Getz, who's actually, I think he kind of plays off of Gibson and Glover rather well as well, because Pesci as Leo, he's pure comedy relief character. But there's also like a lot of interesting kind of revelations that happen in that film that just kind of further add, because I would also argue that Lethal Weapon 2 was more of a Martin Riggs story, if anything, because it actually sheds a lot of light on his character and things that had happened to him. And you get a really tragic revelation out of it. And it just, let's be real, by the way. The scene where he uses his truck to rip out the stilts of the Hollywood Hills house that the bad guys are in is one of the best fucking scenes of all time, by the way. Which is what inspired the very similar scene from Grand Theft Auto 5, by the way. The part where Michael and Franklin use the gardener's truck to rip out the stilts of that house that the tennis instructor that Michael's wife has been fucking behind his back is in. That sets off the whole Carlos Mendoza or whatever, or Martin Mendoza, that whole saga of the game. Like, that's what that was inspired by. Lethal Weapon 2 just does it way better, obviously. Now, I guess if I had to give, like, I don't know, I'd like to talk about these films and what makes them so great, but I don't know how to do that without hitting spoiler or having this video be a million years long. But also, like I said, I don't want to spoil nothing, because would I encourage you to watch this whole franchise? Absolutely. Like, Lethal Weapon is probably one of like the best franchises ever. By the way, avoid the TV show, by the way. That shit sucked. And also, fuck that 24-year-old Nepo baby executive from Warner Brothers who told Richard Donner and Mel Gibson to go fuck themselves when it came to trying to get Lethal Weapon 5 off the fucking ground. Because if you look into what Lethal Weapon 5 could have been, it actually sounds pretty fucking cool. But if I had to give an overall score to Lethal Weapon 2, I would definitely say an 8 out of 10. Instead of it, like, there's a lot that could have made that movie a perfect 10, but Lethal Weapon 2 just doesn't hit the same as the first movie. I've always found that Lethal Weapon was more quotable and is more of a memorable film than Lethal Weapon 2. Not that Lethal Weapon 2 is bad. Obviously 8 out of 10 is pretty fucking good. But it just doesn't hit the same. Still a fucking epic movie though. So I guess that moves on to Lethal Weapon 3. Now, Lethal Weapon 3, this is also the film, by the way, we see obviously everybody returning as well. You know, it's still Gibson, it's still Mel Gibson, it's still Danny Glover, Joe Pesci's back as Leo Getz. But this is also the film that introduces Rene Russo as well. In fact, I think her character is Laura Cole, who is Internal Affairs. Now, the plot of this movie involves a former dirty cop becoming an arms dealer. And I would argue that the plot of this one is arguably very kind of hits pretty close to home, especially if you're someone who like lives in the inner city. I don't, but it's a very how would I phrase this? The plot of Lethal Weapon 3 is arguably very relevant to today because it involves the ramifications of arms dealing and as well as like gun violence and gang violence and stuff like that within like inner cities and shit like that, how it affects like, you know, young black men, young Latino men, stuff like that. Of one scene in particular, actually several scenes in that movie I will come back to again, by the way. Lethal Weapon 3, I would argue, is actually just as good as Lethal Weapon 2. Because like I said, like all the Lethal Weapon films, these films balance action, humor, but also like heart very, very deeply. And as for heart, I will explain later. But there are some kind of like dark moments in this particular film. By the way, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Riggs goes to find the drunken Murtaugh, and they both fall in the water, and it's before they fall into the water. Murtaugh's like, tries to tell Riggs, like, anything that is bothering you, you can tell me. I'm here for you. And he's like, well, no, he goes, I don't want to. It's stupid. No, he goes, no, tell me. He goes, I might have had sex with somebody I shouldn't have. And then, of course, Murtaugh thinks Riggs is talking about having sex with his daughter. And, Murtaugh punches him, knocks him into the water, and then dives in after him. Or no, Riggs grabs Murtaugh, pulls him into the water. And he's like, you had sex with Rianne. He goes, no, I didn't. He goes, I had sex with Sergeant Cole. And then Murtaugh looks at him and goes, Sergeant Cole from Traffic? And Riggs is like, not Sergeant Cole from Traffic. It's like, yeah, it's funny as fuck. I love that movie. I just love this whole fucking series. Like Lethal Weapon 2, I will have to say, I give Lethal Weapon 3 an 8 out of 10, for sure. Because it does have, like I said, well, you know what, maybe actually I'm being a little more generous. I think I'll give Lethal Weapon 3 an 8.5 out of 10, actually, the more I think about it. Because it's, like I said, there are times where it has these kind of, like, more serious beats in the film that hit just as hard as, like, the first movie, by the way. So, yeah, you know what, yeah, 8.5 out of 10 for Lethal Weapon 3. And now, last but certainly not least, we get to the last film in the franchise, Lethal Weapon 4, which, takes place, this is also the first Lethal Weapon, by the way, that Mel Gibson doesn't have his iconic 80s, early 90s mullet anymore. The movie also came out in 1995, which sees the introduction of a whole different kind of villain, by the way, because Lethal Weapon 4 features Jet Li, who, for the life of me, by the way, I cannot remember what his character's name was, but he's the main villain of the film. And it's Jet Li, so you know motherfuckers are going to get their asses beat. But this is also the same film that introduces a new character, a new supporting character in the form of Chris Rock as Sergeant Butters. You have a right to remain silent, which means shut the fuck up. You have a right to an attorney. If you don't have an attorney, one will be provided for you. We will provide you the dumbest fucking attorney on earth. If you get, what was it? Fuck, I can't think of the lawyer's name, but it was like famous TV lawyer. He's like, I'll kill you. Like oh god, I love that. There's also a funny scene where Chris Rock plays off of Joe Pesci, all because of like racial misinterpretations. That's just it's fucking funny. It's great. But the plot of Lethal Weapon 4 delves into it deals with Riggs and Murtaugh having to deal with the Chinese triad and everything like that. But it also delves into human trafficking as well, and which has some pretty sad and very kind of heartbreaking moments that happen. Because this is the part of the story that actually really focuses on Murtaugh as well, because Murtaugh's played by Danny Glover, a black man who, he's seeing people getting trafficked and being used for slave labor by a criminal organization, so that he takes it very personally. Even though the people getting trafficked are Chinese, it doesn't, this kind of shows, like, what I love about this game is, well, this story of Lethal Weapon 4 is it doesn't play with that oppression bullshit you see a lot of today. It just establishes that slavery, for all intents and purposes, is bad, no matter who it happens to. And I love that. I mean, I also kind of like understand Riggs's element to the story, because the scene opens up with him kind of like sparring with a younger officer, and he gets his ass kicked. And he later confesses in private that the only reason that he kind of like bowed out, because it was the only way because he acknowledged that it's like, because this film deals with the concept of Riggs himself, because obviously the infamous line from Danny Glover as Roger Murtaugh is, I'm too old for this shit. Well, the time has now come where Martin Riggs, played by Mel Gibson, is now officially getting too old for this shit. But there's also this side plot as well, of where Murtaugh finds out that his daughter Rianne is pregnant. And of course you find out that by this point in time, because in Lethal Weapon 3 it establishes a romance between Mel Gibson's Martin Riggs and Rene Russo's Laura Cole, which blossoms into her being pregnant in Lethal Weapon 4. So it's like, oh, Riggs is going to be a father, Murtaugh's going to be a grandfather, and now they're both kind of getting too old for this shit. And this is really about family and everything like that. Because it's like, without giving up too much away, the identity of who the father of Murtaugh's daughter's child is like, adds a bit of humor to it, because Riggs finds out, but he doesn't want to tell Murtaugh, so it leads to a lot of confusion and stuff. That's it just adds for a lot of good comedy humor. But yeah, like I would have to say, like, the overarching themes of this movie is like togetherness, family, not in the Vin Diesel kind of way, but like literal, like, just family and everything like that. It's like that's probably the more wholesome element of it. But it also deals with like getting old and learning when it might be time to kind of recognize that you're past your prime and that you might need to bow out. And that being said, while the humor in this movie is great as always, by the way, rest in peace, Uncle Benny. It's fried rice, you plick. The action in this movie is also really, really good as well, because like, you got Riggs and like the final fight between when Riggs and Murtaugh fight Jet Li is it's both fun. It's both like it's suspenseful, but it's also like it's exceptionally brutal. Weirdly enough, but without giving up too much away, I also kind of can't help but feel like Lethal Weapon 4 is the weakest of the franchise as well. Not saying it's a bad movie. It's just not as it doesn't hit home like the first three films do. I mean that classic Lethal Weapon feel is there. Those serious tones are there, but I feel like they tried to play it up more with the humor, and it kind of, like I said, the whole franchise always has these deep moments, and I will get to that shortly, but uh it just, I feel like, I don't know, it just I don't know, it just, it feels like they downplayed seriousness in favor of comedy, and that's the one thing that just kind of bogs it down for me. And that's why it kind of hurts. But if I had to give an overall, score, I mean, I do recommend all four of these movies, but if I had to give a final score, like out of 10 for Lethal Weapon 4, I will give this one a 7 out of 10. Now, let's finally get to I guess my closing statement. And it's it's that why this franchise has this like perfect like kind of work-life balance almost between like seriousness, heart, comedy, and action, because the action's great. Like, I mean, to watch the movie is to see the action speak for itself. But like in terms of like in the comedy as well, like the jokes in these movies are ones that you will, after you watch these films, you will find yourself quoting. But then that you get to these, how do I say that, put this best? The funny thing about the Lethal Weapon movies is that they have these moments of like deep, like these movies that just, they kind of have sequences where that cut so deep, you're almost not mentally prepared for it. Uh, as someone who has dwelled with, who's struggled with depression and self-destructive tendencies, it's hard not to relate to the character of Martin Riggs. Then there's the one scene in particular where he's looking at the picture of his wife who was killed in a car accident, and he sticks a special bullet, which is a custom hollow point, and he sticks it into his Beretta, and he like puts his gun in his mouth, and he's just, you can tell he wants to, but something's keeping him from doing it. And it's one of those scenes that you don't expect to see in a movie like this. And it's a very emotional scene, and as someone who has found himself, because while I can't relate to knowing what it's like having the woman you love is dead and gone, the woman I love is very much still alive. It's just it's just as bad, I'd argue, because I've just made her hate me so much to the point that she wouldn't waste a squirt of spit to put me out if I was on fire. And I did that. But that scene for me with Riggs when he sticks the gun in his mouth just hits so fucking hard, that because I've found myself in that position so many fucking times that I watch that scene. I don't know why, but I get like a lump in my throat when I watch that scene. Because like I said, I've found myself there so many fucking times, it hurts. And then you get another, scene in Lethal Weapon 3. And it's probably the one that if you're someone who is very familiar with this franchise, you probably know the one I'm talking about. But it's the scene that it starts off rather wholesome, like Murtaugh takes Riggs to to a guy he knows that does like street burgers and stuff like that. And it starts off rather wholesome and everything, but Riggs happens to like notice some weird back alley shit going on, goes to investigate. And then a bunch of young gangbangers open fire on him, which causes Murtaugh to go assist Riggs, and Murtaugh shoots and kills one of them, only to get hit with the startling realization that this gangbanger he shot was a kid he knew since he was a boy. That this kid he shot was his son's best friend, which then, fast tracks. Murtaugh disappears for a while because you find out he's so emotionally devastated because, again, he didn't just shoot some random gangbanger. He shot a gangbanger who just so happened to be the boy that his son was best friends with since they were like wee little. Then, you finally find Riggs, who, he finds Murtaugh on his boat, pissed drunk. Murtaugh acts like he doesn't give a shit about anything, and even says something like, I don't give a fuck about that. I don't give a fuck about you. And Riggs takes it personally, telling him, you're a selfish son of a bitch and everything like that. But then you get this kind of emotional speech from Riggs towards Murtaugh, and it reminds me of a conversation that I had with my brother. And it's that bit where Riggs says, I have three beautiful kids in the three most beautiful kids in the whole wide world. They're yours. He goes, your wife does my laundry and cooks my dinner. I live in your icebox. I live in your life. And it's like, oh, talk amongst yourselves. I'm joking. Now, thinking about it just kind of hits hard, but especially given the precedence of what happened, that makes me think of that scene, or what that scene reminds me of. And it's just, it's strange because, again, these are action movies. These are buddy cop movies that go from the 80s to the late 80s to the mid 90s. So you don't expect them to have that kind of emotional tension, like suspenseful tension for like action sequences. That's understandable. But like that emotional tension, that emotional impact that these films carry, it's so fucking, it's different. And I think that's what I love about these films, because they market themselves off as buddy cop action comedies, but they actually have a whole lot of heart to them. And like one of my favorite scenes of dialogue in these movies will always be in the first movie, and it's that scene where Murtaugh, after Riggs has done something incredibly reckless involving a guy threatening to jump off a building, you get that whole scene where Murtaugh drags Riggs inside and jumps his ass over what he just did. And then that's when Riggs finally opens up about his suicidal tendencies, and it has an impact, because it's like, as someone who has struggled with that myself, it just has this weird fucking like impact, because it's like sometimes you want to talk about it, but you also feel like you're trapped in a world where no one gives a fuck. So you don't know how to translate that emotion to anybody, and it hits different, because effectively Riggs is blurting out the pain he feels, and it's something that I wish that I could do. I mean, I've tried, but it always comes out wrong, and I don't know how else to put it. I mean, I don't feel that way now, but I did for a long time, a very long time. But yeah, well, that's it for this franchise. Now, I wish I could say that that we would have gotten Lethal Weapon 5, which I would say, like, look into the story about that. But unfortunately, that film was canceled, or was denied production, because some 24-year-old executive who only had that job because their mommy or daddy was higher ranked than them. It's like, how the fuck are you 24 years old and you're a corporate fucking executive at a fucking movie studio, unless you either suck dick for that job or you had it handed off to you by a parent who was a higher position than you were. stinks like corporate cocksuckery or nepotism to me, if I'm being honest with myself. And unfortunately, the late great Richard Donner has passed on. Even though it's funny because both Mel Gibson and Danny Glover are still up for it, I doubt we'll ever see that movie. Would have been cool because the theme of that movie would have actually been very culturally relevant today. It deals with dirty cops, police brutality, and stuff like that, while also not being woke as shit either. But that's really all I got for this one. I was not expecting this video to be over a half hour long, but that's what when you get when you try to give a reasonable review of an entire fucking film franchise. I wish I could had the proper editing software to edit in clips from the movie that didn't get me in trouble, just to kind of to properly illustrate what I'm talking about in these films. But if there is one pro to that, it just means that, well, you're just going to have to watch these movies, y'all. And you should. But anyway, that's all I've got. If you made it this far, as always, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. And thank you for your interest in this subject. Lethal Weapon films are great. I'll probably try to keep it, for sake of shorter runtimes, I'll try to keep it probably just singular films. Probably be easier. That way I can always, if I do another franchise, I can just do in the individual films. That way I can spend a little bit more time on them. But anyway, I thank you for your time. May you all have a great week. I will say this is going to be my last video for the year. So, to those of you watching, whether you be stranger, friend, or family, if you are a Christian, I say to you, Merry Christmas. And to my pagan brothers and sisters, I say God Yule. May you all be blessed. May you all be safe. Happy holidays.